Welcome to the Photoethics Podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Dodd, and I'm the founder of the Photography Ethics Center. Each week, I'll be talking with an accomplished photographer about the ethics of their practice. Today, in episode number 11, we'll be talking with Taha Ahmad about working with historical trauma. Taha Ahmad is a documentary photographer based in Delhi. He was born in Lucknow in 1994, and he developed an interest in documentary photography while pursuing his bachelor's degree. He feels photography has a strong influence in creating and developing discourse for the future. Taha's work represents the shift in the pluralistic landscape, the traumatic past, and the culture which is threatened by religious conflicts, social injustice, politics, and the times we live in. Could we start by just telling me a little bit about the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a visual artist based in India, and I usually work on long-term black and white photography projects, which evolves from my memory sometimes, the region of Awadh where I was born and brought up. So a lot of times my projects evolve from the history of that region, from the culture of that region. And I usually work on a very long period of time. Let's say, most of my projects take years of practice to finally get developed or, to take a shape.
Something that I've been doing a lot more in a lot of my work is looking at archival photographs. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about how you approach using archival photographs and if there are any ethical considerations that have come up as part of that practice? Because, for example, here in Northern Ireland, I'm working with a lot of photographs of people in traumatic situations. And there are maybe also a lot of government sensitivities about what is viewable. So do you have anything like that comes up in your work?
Recently I started a work which was based on the partition of India and Pakistan that happened during the time of 1947. It is known as the largest displacement that has ever happened in the history of mankind. I recently was reading a book by Urvashi Butalia called The Other Side of Silence, and that motivated me to work on this project, which actually, the idea was that I read a lot of textual things about the partition. There were a lot of texts, there were a lot of, literature, both fiction and non-fiction, which was written about partition. Then there are a lot of, oral history records, family histories, but there have been hardly any visual records about the partition. Most of the visual records that we have are the pictures that have been shot by the photojournalists who were on the field while the partition was taking place. But after that, there was no visual records that what happened once the country was divided. What was the aftermath of it? What were the repercussions of that? So in this project, I used a lot of photographic, old family album photographs and archives from the families itself, because, that was of very much importance to me, because there were people, who were in the photographs but were actually killed during the massacre or were killed during the partition. Then there were family members, there were families who were facing identity crisis. For example, half of the family went to Pakistan and, they became Muslims, and the half of the Muslim family, who remained in Pakistan, they have to hide their identities. So these are the places where I've used a lot of archives. Then there were interviews for which I dig deep into the newspaper archives of people, the old photographs. I use archival imagery in a lot of forms in my work. It's not just limited to family photographs or state archives and yes, I completely understand that it is troublesome because, some way or the other, most of the facts of the partition of India and Pakistan were erased from the textual history that we read today. Almost 70% of it, we read about that displacement happened, we read about independence, we read about, so we knew that all of these things happened, but, the textual history, it only tells it about, the factual data that around 1 million people were displaced, or, how many people were killed, or, that this country happened, these were the leaders. But what about the history of the people? What about, the the family histories, the history of migration. So, nobody talks about, the mass rapes or that took place. What about the mass killings that were, especially of the women and girls of the family, that were done by the family members itself, just because they wanted to save the honor of their family and of their religion. So, like, nobody talks about these things. And even nobody talks about, the family history or the houses that were left behind, the memories. And this is how, this is actually the base on which, the formation of India and Pakistan have been made. So nobody talks about these things. Everybody talks about, that these are the two countries now who have, become rival, or whatever it is. They gain independence. Pakistan gain independence on 14th August and India gain independence on 15th August. People talk about that, but what about, the things that have been erased from the history? What about what about the communities that have always been neglected, the stories of, the communities which have never come out? So nobody put emphasis on this. So I feel, my archival material from the state archive is just limited to the factual things that have been recorded by the journalist at that time. But apart from that, I'm more focused on family archives, and the whatever the material I could actually get from the families itself to draw upon my research and my photographic work. So yeah, that's what I have been doing, and it's a very vast project. I still think it will take me at least 4 or 5 years.
I was just thinking there that I think it's quite interesting what you said about how this recognition that the state archive only contains something very specific, and you have to supplement that with the family archive, because otherwise it's not the whole story. And I was wondering if you could tell me maybe a little bit about how you gain access into those family archives, and if you seek permission, or if permission you feel is necessary or not necessary for maybe replicating or reusing those images, especially if they're images of people who are deceased.
So yeah, starting with it, I would say, of course, I took the permission of these people, because this is how they actually gave me, these family albums, or the letters that they have, in their family records, or, the previous passports, or whatever archival material that these families have. So, like, I would not have been able to access, because it is, with the family. So I have to take the permission. And whenever I shoot any of the archival material, I always shoot it in front of the family members, so that they are aware what I am shooting, or what I am scanning, or which letter I'm scanning, and also like how I'm going to use it. So for example, I tell you, I met a woman in Punjab whose name was Noop Kaur, and she was 3 years old while her brother was 8 years old when they were separated because of the partition. So it happened, they used to live in Punjab, but Noop Kaur's aunt used to live in Lahore at that time, and it was only India. There was no Pakistan at that time. So her brother, along with one of her another aunt, went to her aunt's place to actually spend some time. And then suddenly this Radcliffe line was drawn, and then it was announced over the radio that that the country has been divided into two. Yeah, this happened, and then they were separated, and there was no coming back. And like, they almost got connected back after 68 years. So now this women, Noop Kaur and his brother, who lives in Pakistan, they regularly write letters to each other, and they even visit each other sometimes. So what I did was, I actually scanned one letter of Noop Kaur, which was written in Urdu by his brother, and then I actually, scanned another letter which was written by Noop Kaur to her brother, which was written in Punjabi language. I just put these letters together. So the importance was, like, see, like, even they are separated, they are separated through geography, they are separated through border, they are separated in terms of religion, in terms of language, yet they are so close. So this was the importance, and the emotions that the letters carry with themselves was very important for me to put out.
Absolutely. I think You're describing really a lot of quite traumatic memories that you're working with, and I'm sure that can be very difficult, especially when you're approaching people and asking for consent to sort of go through maybe a box that they have really tucked away in the back of their closet because it's full of a lot of very difficult things to engage with, and so I'm sure that has to be done with a lot of sensitivity, and I'm sure you've probably faced a fair bit of rejection for that as
it's
well.
it's not easy, and it's not even easy emotionally for me, because talking about those incidents again and again, a lot of times, the eldest or the elder ones in the family, they don't want to talk about it in front of their family members, because they never told their children, or their generations which came after the partition, about what happened with them. So sometimes the family members, they don't want to talk about it in front of the other family members, and a lot of times, talking about this takes them back, and it actually gives them an emotional toll. And what I do is, like, my process is, I never go and talk about it straight away, or I never go, I my process of working on all of my projects, because they all are very sensitive. So it's always like, first I research, I find out people, then I always go and I started living in that area itself. So in the very first meeting, I never used to speak about it. I was always used to speak about the area, what are the good things, what I can see, as if I'm a tourist or as if I'm a traveler. Then I used to tell them that I'm living in this area, and then they were like, oh, you are a city boy, how come you can you can travel from the city life to and come to live in this village, or the place which has so much of trauma. Then they start getting open, then they start getting open, or telling me things that and I'm always like a curious child who is just listening to stories. So I always they start telling me themselves, and this is how I finally make a relation with them. And then I start asking them questions, so that they don't feel that I'm only here just to extract the tragic memories they have, but instead they feel that I am a curious person who is here to understand, and who can feel what they, at least, even it's not correct to say that I can never feel what these person face, but at least I can just have an essence or a part of what they felt, or what they have gone through at the time of partition. And then a lot of other times, what I do is I always try to befriend the people who are of my age in the area itself. Then I go around playing cricket with them. And then with this project, I also started teaching a lot of children English near the border areas, because these were from these families. And then when I met these families, they said, Are, like they said in Hindi, aap sheher se ho, so it means you're from city, you know English, you are educated, can you do a little bit of counseling of our children? We don't want them just to stay here all their lives, we want them to do something in their life. So I start teaching them, I start counseling them, and slowly I gain the trust of these families and of these people, and this is how I get access. And I never shoot also, like any of my projects, I just don't go and shoot. I know that I work on long-term projects, I have ample of time. So, like, even if I'm not shooting for, let's say, 2 weeks, it doesn't matter to me. For what matters to me is that I'm able to get the real truth out of it. So yeah, for me, relations and honesty are very important, that a person should share with their subjects in order to get the real truth behind the story they are working.
Absolutely. And I know you put a real emphasis in your work on doing a lot of background research. And I think that's really, really important, but also really interesting because you are working on the country that you grew up in. So you have already so much background knowledge, but the fact that you feel the need to further explore that and to put in the time, I think is quite admirable, because I think it can be very easy to think, oh, I'm from here, I know what's going on. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you view that research process and why that's important to you.
For me, research is very important, because even this this in this lockdown, that happened because of COVID. During the 5 months that I spent here in my hometown, I've been only researching and reading about partition of India. So they have, written a lot of partition literature, both fiction and non-fiction. So I've been reading about that. Then, there was this newspaper archive that I got from the British Library. So, I took out the interviews from those newspapers, because, all these incidents, they never happened, just in a day or a two. These were actually, this was actually the result of the events that were taking place since March 1947. So I feel research is very important, because, as I said, if I would have just read the history which is in our textbook, or I would have read only the things that are on the internet, I wouldn't have been able to find so much about these communities, so much about the family history of the people. So and without your research, you won't be able to find the facts. I feel the facts are also very important in such projects. This is something which not just challenges the younger generation or the communities, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, living in India. It is something which also challenges the government. So if you are putting out something out in front of the world, your facts should be correct. So I feel, ethically, a person should have their facts right. They shouldn't manipulate any factual events. So for that, research is very important. Also, I feel research is very important to gain access, because once you know the history, the background of a particular person or of a particular community, it's very important for you to go and speak to them in their own language, because you know how these people are, what their culture is. So it's very easy for you to gain access. So it's not just about that you're going to get a good project, or you're going to write something which people haven't written before, or it's not that you're going to make a big project, or you're going to, it's not about that. It's all about research is also something which actually becomes a part of your process. It is something which actually which actually leads you to a particular idea. It is something which decides how are you going to execute it, how are you going to gain access. So it is it is actually one of the most major part of the workflow. So this is why I put a lot of emphasis on research. Also, I feel research doesn't only include the historical artifacts or the archives. It also includes literature. It actually gave me a lot of understanding about the partition, both fiction and non-fiction. To it's this is why research is important, because when a person knows about the roots of their work, roots about their own family, or the roots about the family of the subject and the background of the subject, they have a better understanding of the kind of work they are going to produce, and what impact the work could make when it is out in front of the world. So I feel this is why research is very important.
Absolutely. And I love the point as well that you make about how it's not just, textbook. It's also literature. It's also news stories. It's also all these other sources that you can draw on. Because like you said, it's sort of the same thing as the official archive. You'll get a certain story from different sources. And so sort of triangulating that by going to multiple formats, multiple sources, I'm sure is very, very useful in your work. Finally, could you tell me, what does photography ethics mean to you?
Oh, photography ethics, I would say, like, especially for me, I'm like, it might differ from person to person again. Another photographer you interview or you inquire might have, a very different perspective to it. But for me, it's like, it's kind of, the morals that I live my daily life with, or it is the morals upon which we lay the foundation of our daily lives. And I feel ethics again differ from place to place, work to work, and situation to situation. And I feel in, like, while working on a photography project, it's always important to preserve the dignity of your subject. Do not photograph them in the ways that are either exploitive, or which predates on their vulnerabilities. And there might be situations when the subject might not want to get photographed, and then it's the sole responsibility of me as a photographer to to make sure that the honor of the subject is preserved. Like, we should always try to convince them if it is very important for our work, and if still the subject insist, we shouldn't do it. And yeah, a lot of photographers, as I've spoken before, give false hope to the subject for a better future. And so I feel, as photographers, we shouldn't carry this practice on. And these false hope, these also include monetary assistance, medical aid, housing, job opportunities, as well as the solution to their daily lives with the help of the government body or the photographer itself. I feel this is something which a lot of times the photographers also do just to gain the access. They give false hope to to their subjects that they're gonna, or they say that they're gonna do justice to them. I don't feel any photographer can do justice to a particular community or to the particular subject they are working upon. They can, what they can do is that they can bring out the story of the subject. They can shed light on how the conditions of the subject is, or what all the problems that is existing in the society, or the social injustice that is that is persisting. I don't think so any photographer can do justice. It's always about bringing out the stories. It's always about awareing the society that what all exists. I also feel, as a photographer, there are particular situations where I always abide by what my heart says than my mind, or my greed to create an image, which again could be I'm saying an award winning picture, or could get me publications or recognitions. So while I was working on this project, and I was shooting like in Delhi, in the Okla Ghat, I remember it was winters, and I went there before the sunrise. It was 6 a.m. And as soon as I reached there, started clicking photographs, a person approached me. He caught hold of my hand and he started dragging me. And he was like, come, come, come with me. So for a moment, I resisted. But then again, he insisted. So I decided, yes, let's go and see what he wants to show me. And when I went there, I saw there was a huge rock, and he just lifted the rock, and under the rock I saw a crushed body of a young girl child, which was crushed by the rock. So that was something which actually shook me from from my head to toe. And like, I have read and I knew and I still know that even in the suburbs and the rural areas of India, especially in the villages, there is a great importance for a male child, and people kill if a woman child is born inside the house. I knew that this was a girl child which must have born to a family, and they just brought the girl child and crushed it. So yeah, when I saw this, my mind was like, this is a picture what I need to make. This can be an iconic picture which could bring me in front, like which could get me a front page of all the newspapers, all the magazines. But there were two things. First of all, I didn't find it ethical, because my heart was saying that like, the girl child, even in her death, was so vulnerable that, and it's tough for me also to explain, but my heart wasn't allowing me to photograph that, and eventually I didn't. I stood there for a long time, thought about it continuously. I was like, on one hand I was like, do it, then I was like, no, it's not good. It's not good to photograph anyone in such a situation, when when the dead body is, when the body of the dead is so vulnerable. And also the second point was, I feel that India is a great country. It's a diverse nation, and every nation has, good or bad parts of it. So I feel, just to reflecting about of something that actually depicts the dark side of a society, I feel it's more important for me to understand that why that incident happened, why people do it. It's not just about people want to do it. It's very tough for a father or a mother to kill their own child, but it's the society that leads to it. It's about the things that exist in our society, for example the dowry system that have been imposed by the society upon the people, that makes these parents believe that a girl child is a liability that is responsible for such incidents. It's not the country which is responsible, it's not the parents who are responsible, it's not the elder or the younger generation or the people who makes up the Indian society who are responsible. It's the patriarchy, it's the society which is responsible collectively on whole, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, or community. So I felt that irrespective of doing this, if I would try to understand that why this problem exists, and if I could go back, try to do something on it, even if I do not want to work on such a subject, if I could go back and just even on my assignment, just go and make people aware, tell them that how things exist. And like, even if I would talk to them in their own language, I would say, you how will you be able to take your generations forward if there are no women? Men cannot bear a child in their womb. So it's about these things. It's about, rather than just putting a picture out to the world and getting published, which actually shames up my great country, which I'm proud of. So I feel these were the two things that stopped me from taking that photograph.
I think that that's a really interesting point as well that you made about how there are these sort of shocking photographs we could take, but that doesn't really talk about, why. And maybe it's not about taking the shocking photograph, but it's about exposing sort of deeper things that run through society. So I think that that's a really useful point. And as well, I wanted to ask you if we could unpack one of the points that you made in terms of asking for consent, because you were talking about, how we should convince people and try to convince people if they say no. And I was just wondering, does that not risk, because obviously there's quite a power structure there as well, right? So when you're coming into a situation as a photographer, you have a lot more power than the people that you're photographing. So I was just a little bit wondering if you could maybe unpack that a little bit, what you mean when you say convincing, and how you can do that in a way that's ethical and that doesn't pressurize people to do something that they're not comfortable with.
So again, talking about the consent, I would say it's very similar to ethics. It differs from assignment to assignment, place to place, project to project. I work on long-term projects, so always the first 2 or 3 months are very difficult. But I feel, when you are in a person's space again and again for such a long time, from morning till afternoon, you share your story, whatever experience with them, they share theirs with yours, and they knew that you understand it. It becomes, something as if of a mutual understanding. You become a part of the community, of the family. Then this barrier of, consent, or this barrier of, trust issues doesn't exist.
Is that not quite dangerous sometimes?
It is. It depends, on the intention of the person who have entered, the private space of these people or any particular community, like gaining their trust and then, breaking their trust and doing something which is not good for the society. It actually, see, honestly speaking, if a person does that, the society won't be able to do anything about it. It's been done and dusted. But then, it's about the repercussions which follows. It's about, if then any person approaches the community who is really honest, who really wants to do something for the society, he would never be able to, gain that trust of the community, because, they have already been hurt and betrayed. So I feel it becomes very important for any genuine person also to gain trust. Like even in this small career of mine, like it's been only 5.5 years I've started photography, but it's just about the people I have met and the people I have worked with. they have been such amazing people, and the experience that I've had with them, like, I have plenty of stories to tell. And it's not just about my experiences and stories, to tell, or, just to, again, I would say, to garner an audience who would listen to me. But in fact, all of these things have also shaped up me as a person and my ideology, and now how I look up to things which are very sensitive in nature.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to share new insights about photography ethics with others. So if you heard something you liked, please share this podcast with someone who would appreciate it. The links to all things mentioned in this episode number 11 are available in the show notes at www.photoethics.org. Join me next week when we hear from David Degner on the choices we make. If you're enjoying this podcast, why don't you check out our online courses? We've developed a series of 3 online courses designed specifically for photojournalists and documentary photographers. We discuss questions like, how do we achieve accuracy in our photographs? What's the relationship between power and consent? And when, if ever, should we intervene? These online courses come with perks, like access to an online community group for discussion and Q&A opportunities with me, the course leader. Enroll today at www.photoethics.thinkific.com or go to www.photoethics.org and click Online Courses.